Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about irradiation of foods, the good and the bad. Should we add ugly in there? The good, the bad, and the ugly? um, First of all, irradiation of food is a form of radiation, just like when you cook in the microwave, that's a form of radiation. And the whole purpose of it is to break down bacteria and insects that could hide in foods like meat, grains, and so forth. Sometimes companies like to use food contamination scandals as a reason to do it. It helps to prolong shelf life. So that helps companies, processing companies, take their companies overseas where it's less expensive to process things. And that's kind of like the good of it, I guess. Longer shelf life, help with insects and bugs and things like that. Kind of like compared to pasteurized milk, just a different process being used. So what are some other things that can have a knock? And that sometimes people have noticed, they've been in studies and they have noticed how it changes the food. Now, I know for myself personally, if I was to microwave something or to reheat something in a microwave, the food definitely changes the taste. For me, I notice that. And that's what other people have noticed as well. It changes the texture, it might change the color, it might change the taste or the flavor of the food. So that means it actually changes the food. Okay, it doesn't just eradicate the insects or the potential dangerous bacteria. It actually can change the food. So how does it do this? So it can create substances, byproducts, that can cause mutagens or gene mutations. One of these would be polyploidy. It's an abnormal condition in which cells contain more than 2 sets of chromosomes. Some of these mutations are associated with cancerous cells. And so a change in a cell can even prevent it from reproducing. And many mutagens are also carcinogens. Now, research has also shown that irradiation forms toxic chemicals like benzene and toluene. Now, these are chemicals I'm sure you've heard me talk about before as being chemicals in fragrances or other household products or personal care products, and these are not things that you want. They are known or suspected to cause cancer and birth defects. Irradiation also can cause stunted growth in lab animals that are fed irradiated foods. Not that lab animals themselves are irradiated, but they're eating the irradiated foods. One thing that's interesting is that the FDA has never tested the safety of these byproducts from the irradiation. They can also cause low-level production of furans, which are similar to cancer-causing dioxins in fruit juice. So just like everything, I always tout to go to the root or the source of the problem rather than just putting a Band-Aid solution over it. And irradiation is kind of that Band-Aid solution. Rather than going to the source of the problem of where the bacteria or contamination is coming from. You know, like the farms or the processing plant itself. They just want to irradiate it because it's probably simpler to do that. And then that provides even less incentive for the farmers and the handlers to upgrade whatever their system is to make it safer and better. So really all that's being looked at here is a longer shelf life, money in the pockets, and in the long run, safety on which perspective, from which perspective, not sure. Irradiation, it is interesting though that irradiation doesn't stop everything. It does not stop toxins that are produced by botulism, for example, and other viruses like foot and mouth disease or hepatitis. These are all resistant to radiation doses that are used in foods. So irradiation gives companies more flexibility in their marketing and transportation, because if they're, shipping overseas, it gives them a longer time frame in order to ship something, to get it to its destination. So, it reduces their spoilage, it increases their ability to pick where they want to ship from and buy from, probably, I would imagine that as well, and still provide lower costs of, handling costs and sanitary and safety standards. There is, to look at my notes here a minute, I found this to be interesting, that labeling, if a food is irradiated, it is required to be labeled as such. But what's interesting about that is that whole foods have to be labeled. For instance, maybe it's a chicken. I'm just grabbing something out of the air. Maybe it's a chicken. That's a whole food. That has to be labeled as irradiated if it has been. And there's a specific label for it. However, if it's a non-irradiated chicken that's been cooked and processed or has ingredients on it ready for you to cook, and those ingredients that have been added to the chicken have been irradiated, that does not need to be labeled. I found that to be pretty interesting. So something else is that dried herbs and spices are not required to have a label of irradiation. And yet these are the very items that get irradiated the most. But you'll be happy to know that McCormick does not irradiate theirs. If you buy McCormick spices, they don't irradiate theirs. The other thing that I found interesting is that the FDA is trying to change, and has been for many years. I don't think it's happened yet, but for many years it's been in the process of trying to change the wording for irradiation on foods. So instead of saying irradiation or irradiated or treated by irradiation or treated by irradiation or treated by radiation, they wanted to say electronically pasteurized or cold pasteurized, thus giving the sense of a similarity between pasteurized foods like milk, but it's a completely different process. Pasteurization uses heat, irradiation uses high energy gamma rays, electron beams, or X-rays on foods. It's not the same as pasteurization. And they did a kind of a study to get people's reaction to that change. And their reaction was that this was sneaky, deceptive, misleading, trying to fool you. This is not something that the public wanted to see. Another interesting point that I found was that in an act of 1958, it places, it's a Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1958 for food additives. It places food irradiation under the food additives regulations, not a process, but an additives, because radiation changes the food. Just like when you add something to a food, it might change the taste of it, it might change the texture of it. Radiation does the same thing, and so they have placed it under additive. So this is what it says. Sources of radiation including radioactive isotopes, particle accelerators, and X-ray machines intended for use in processing food are included in the term food additive. And in this way, it's a food that is adulterated, but it cannot. The Food Additives Amendment states that a food is adulterated, meaning it cannot be marked legally if it has been intentionally irradiated, unless the irradiation is carried out in conformity with a regulation prescribing safe conditions of use. So, just for clarification, the statute defines the form of energy, does not define the form of energy or the process of irradiation as an additive, but it's the equipment that's used to irradiate the food as it may affect the characteristics of the food. So if you're confused, you're not alone. As with everything, there's always other things to be considered. I mean, there's just always things that we don't know about. That is one thing that I really appreciated when I did the research on the Ningxia wolfberries. Most wolfberries coming in from, or at that time, anything coming in of wolfberries into the United States had to be irradiated. But the Ningxia wolfberries are not. They weren't then and they aren't now. So I appreciate that aspect of it because, and the good thing too is that organic foods are not irradiated. So if you buy organic, or you know the source, you know your farmer down the road, a local person, you know what the source is, you know it's not being irradiated and it's not changing the food, because we know our body then has to adjust, make adjustments, and who knows what that does to our bodies. As it said, it creates these mutagens that can be cancerous. It creates the cancerous chemicals, and our bodies have enough to deal with. So if we can avoid those things, why not do it, right? So there is the good, the bad, and the ugly on food irradiation. Now, go be awesome.